Well, Frederica, thanks for having me. And I'll tell you, I woke up to that Miami Herald Tampa Bay Times report this morning and my jaw dropped because uh, when we were touring, and by the way, this was a prearranged tour rather than an unannounced one, which members of Congress are entitled to under statute that I passed into law in the first Trump administration. But when we were touring and we were asking about the status of the detainees that were there, we were told that every single one of them, and he said there were 900, and the camp is currently built for 1,000, were in the finished stages of their immigration process and criminal convictions and were preparing and were in final stages of deportation within the next 2 weeks. Well, we were very suspect of that because they have a bracelet system of red, yellow, and green, I believe. And there were we could hardly get up close to any of them, but it was clear that there were not many with red bracelets. But then the Herald story comes out this morning and shows that hundreds of these 900 detainees have no criminal conviction, and that was our suspicion to begin with. The detainees that are there now, and this is not a prison, this is an immigration detention center, were packed into cages like sardines, 8 cages per tent, 32 to a cage. As what you heard the reporter say, 3 very small toilets with sinks attached to the top of them, so that you are literally defecating and urinating where you brush you in the same unit that you brush your teeth, and that's where their drinking water is. The temperature, I brought a thermometer, was just at the threshold of the so-called air-conditioned tent, was 83 degrees. You go inside, they didn't let us. If you would go in further inside with those hundreds of bodies next to each other, then for sure it was much hotter than that. Red was an individual that had been had a higher level criminal offense that they were convicted of. Green was a medium offense, and yellow, which most of them appeared to be yellow, were minor to civil offenses. And the Herald story made it very clear for the hundreds of names that they reviewed, that most of those were not even stopped for detained for any criminal offense. I mean, we're talking about civil infractions, a traffic stop. And these were also people who were transferred, already being detained, and were moved to this essentially internment camp, where the cruelty seems to be the point. I toured with an unannounced visit about 6 weeks ago, the Chrome Detention Center, and they had a temporary tent facility there that did not have any of the detainees in cages. Yet they told me the reason that they had to have them in cages at this camp was because it was temporary. Well, they don't have the same standards for this facility as they do for the ones that are in permanent sites, but yet temporary structures. And that's because the cruelty is the point. I came out of that detention camp and described exactly what I saw. I brought a thermostat in and measured the temperature, sweltering heat. We saw bugs, grasshoppers, the largest that I've ever seen, hopping along through the encampment. We were not allowed to see the medical clinic. We were not allowed to see we weren't allowed to go in where the detainees were in the cages, just view outside the threshold. But we couldn't go see the actual toilets. We saw one that was in a tent under construction. But I'm telling you plainly exactly what I saw. I've had Tom Homan testify in front of committees that he is someone who is bound and determined to deport as many human beings as possible, no matter whether they were just coming here to make a better way of life for themselves. And by the way, Frederica, this facility was built with $450 million, twice the amount that detainees are usually detained for of state funds. No clue whether we're going to get any of that back in the state of Florida. And that's all while they have, under the big ugly law, cut 17 million people off of their health care, made the largest cuts to nutrition assistance in history. But we can spend $450 million detaining people who apparently committed no other crime for the most part, except trying to make a better life for themselves here. They're not telling the truth, and it's an outrage. Well, when we had, if you remember back in the first term for President Trump, you had the Homestead Detention Center that had unaccompanied minors, and we were able to inspect that eventually when we changed the law that I sponsored, unannounced, and we continued, and protesters continued to demonstrate and oppose the inhumane conditions there. We will get in because this is a facility being managed through the ICE policies, and members of Congress are going to get in for an unannounced visit, and we will not stop until we make sure that, look, that people are treated humanely, that they are not being treated humanely in this facility, and at the end of the day, if you're a criminal and you've been convicted through due process in this country and you're an undocumented immigrant, you should be deported. But if you are someone like who had TPS revoked or humanitarian parole revoked, and you followed our laws and the process, and you're facing deportation now, that's outrageous, and we need to make sure that we are prioritizing the worst of the worst. Donald Trump and his cronies are not telling the truth, and our Republican colleagues are just going along with it because they care more about supporting the MAGA movement than they do about taking care of the human beings, and that constituents that we represent and their families.